Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another My HR Toolkit webinar. My name's Simon. I'm the Sales and Support Team Leader for My HR Toolkit. And today we are going to be talking about what does good performance management look like for SMEs. I'm going to hand over to our guest speaker shortly, Tracey Hopkins from Howarths. Now, if you have been on one of these webinars before, we've been doing it for a little over a year now, you'll be familiar with how our webinars work. If it's your first time, then you're most welcome. Thank you for joining us. What we'll do is I will talk for a little bit longer, and then I'll hand over to Tracey, who will deliver a talk on our topic. During that time, if you want to chat, we'd love you to chat with us. Use the chat option. It's just in the menu bar at the bottom of the screen, or it might be at the side. We may run some polls during the webinar, but we encourage you to chat and to feedback during the session. Now, if you have specific questions that you want to ask Tracey about this topic, we'd ask that you put those in the Q&A option. So just click Q&A, add your question, and then after the talk, we will have some time where we will be able to, or hopefully we'll be able to answer as many of those as we can. Now, so I just want to mention as well that today's session is offering general and not legal advice, and it is based on the information available as of today. So I'm going to hand over to Tracey, who is going to take you through what good performance management looks like for SMEs. Good morning, Tracey.
Morning, Simon. Thank you for that, and morning to all the delegates on this morning's session as well. So Simon's going to share the presentation with you, and before I get started and just give a little introduction to myself and the organisation I work for, I think it would be good just to run a quick poll with just 2 short questions. So the first question being, within your organisation that you currently work within, or the organisation you run, do you have a formal performance management process in place? And if you can just answer yes or no to that, that would be wonderful. Once you've done that one, if you move on to the second poll, which is if you do have a performance management process in place, how often do you review performance with your employees or with your team? There's a few options there for you: annually, quarterly, monthly, biannually, other. If it's other, then just let us know in the chat, and that'd be good. We can pick up on that. So thank you very much if you could run those polls. So if we move on then to our first slide, today's session is about what does good performance management look like for SMEs. A quick introduction to myself as your speaker today. I work for an organisation called Howarths. I joined the company back in 2006 and qualified as a chartered member of CIPD in 2010. In the same year, I became a part of the board of directors at Howarths. Now, I can see quite a few people answering on there. That's brilliant. I'll just move that to one side. So although you can see on there my role at Howarths is Finance and Operations Director, I do also advise a number of SMEs at board level on strategic HR and sit on the board as a consultant. My passion in terms of HR is around employee engagement and building high performing teams. We move on to the next slide. I'll give a brief introduction to Howarths. So Howarths was established in 2003. We're an award-winning family-run business, and we provide specialist HR, employment law, business immigration, and health and safety advice to SMEs. We currently work with around 500 organisations, delivering on-site support, training, and legal advice right through to tribunal representation as well. And let's get started then on today's topic. Have a little review of the polls. I can see there's a mixed group, mixed response there as to yes and no. Annually, we've got 26%, which is good. It's good to see that there's quite a few companies offering performance reviews more frequently than annually. which is what we'll get to in today's session. And I can see there that somebody's looking annually at the moment, but looking to move into more informal sessions, which is perfect. Ongoing process, love that. Brilliant. Right, so in today's session then, so today's session will address the question of what does good performance management look like for SMEs? This is a topic I could talk to you about all day. I mean, the importance of good performance management and the impact that can have not only on the individual performance, but the organisational success and, you know, the bottom line. All too often, businesses, they have a budget, they invest in things like marketing. And when I talk to businesses about HR and investment in HR and people management, it's not yet at that level in some organisations, but my view is that it sits side by side, if not above marketing, because let's face it, your people are your key asset. So we'll do a whistle-stop tour through some basic strategies that SMEs can put in place to ensure that you're effectively managing the performance of your team. Performance management is complex. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, but hopefully you can take away some tips from today's session that you can then apply within your organisation. We do have time for questions at the end, but, you know, like Simon's already said, please use the chat function and I'll try to pick up on these as we go along. So let's look at what the definition of performance management actually is. So you can see the definition. I won't read it out for you. I'll let you have a quick read there. Ultimately, employees are the key to success of any business, and that's any business of any size. Performance management applies to an organisation with 3 employees just as much as it does to an organisation with 300. We often hear the phrase, customers are king, but like I've already said, it's our employees that are our biggest asset. And it's our employees that have the power to decide and choose whether our business is successful or not. The way in which we manage our employees can have a significant impact on the overall success and performance of the company and the bottom line. Effective performance management is the key to enhancing our organisations, and it should be strategic and aligned to aligning individual goals with the long-term goals of the organisation. So ultimately, effective performance management is about helping individuals and teams to be their best. It's about providing a framework to allow individuals to grow within our organisation and achieve their objectives that then link in with the objectives of the company. All too often, performance management is used as a tool to rate performance in order to facilitate decisions about pay and identify poor performers and hold them accountable. And again, you know, from my experience, I hear from individuals and managers that performance management can be used and seen as quite a negative tool within an organisation when it's used in this way. Without an effective performance management process, companies might not be realising the true potential of their employees that they've currently got within the organisation. There could be lots of wasted talent. We could have skills within the business that could enhance the operations, but we're just not tapping into them because we're not investing the time in getting to know the skills and the desires and the career aspirations of the team that we've got in place. This can result in demotivated employees, and this then has a detrimental impact on the company performance. There were some studies quite a while ago, which I always refer to in my chats about disengaged employees. And if you've got a disengaged employee, statistics by the CIPD state that disengaged employees are only performing 40% of their time at work, which means 60% of the investment in that individual is lost. It's wasted money. It's costing businesses huge in terms of financials and also time. The more we can implement frameworks like performance management which follow on from a good induction, the better chance we have as a business of keeping our team motivated, engaged and performing well. Disengaged employees are less inclined to go over and above. They'll keep the knowledge to themselves and might not share that with their colleagues or their peers or line managers. Output levels can be low, and possibly this could affect attendance as well, as disengaged employees are often less committed. Businesses are also at a higher risk of losing key talent to competitors because employees feel undervalued. So if we move on to the next slide, I've put a little cycle on there. So there's no best approach to performance management, but there are, like I said, many strategies that can be used. But it very much depends on the context, the job, the culture, the business strategy. Like I say, performance management is complex. I'll just touch on a quick point regarding remote workers. So everything we're covering today still applies to remote workers, but you may wish to exaggerate some of the points we go through. So more check-ins, more frequent feedback, more conversations around support, learning and development opportunities, and a lot more listening. So there's no single best approach. There are various tools SMEs can use to effectively manage performance, but within any organisation, the main tool by far has to be two-way conversation. Again, I hear often a lot of criticism about performance management and it being a one-way discussion coming from management to employees. But that's not the way it should work. It should be an open exchange of feedback, of views, of ideas around individual performance, career aspirations, learning and development needs and support requests. The slide suggests performance management is a continuous cycle, and somebody popped that in the chat earlier as well. Performance management is a cycle of development discussions that include setting goals, aligned to organisational goals, and ensuring people have the right skills to perform. There should be a strong focus on giving people opportunities to learn and develop. Having a good, thorough, ongoing performance management cycle will help management and businesses if you ever have to have difficult conversations down the line around poor performance and capabilities, because those conversations shouldn't come as any surprise, because you've had the ongoing chat throughout the year about honest feedback, objectives, expectations, and where an individual is sat in line with meeting those expectations. So an ongoing cycle as opposed to a process that starts and ends each year. This cycle should be a performance cycle for the lifetime of the employee within your organisation. And it starts right at the onboarding stage, the probationary period, the induction, the job spec, description. Managers are really key to the performance management cycle, as they need to be having regular conversations with employees to discuss the needs, expectations, barriers to progress, training requirements, tools. They need to be able to have those open and honest conversations. Let's face it, this is a real tough task for managers. And, you know, if we're going to set managers up with this responsibility, we also need to make sure that they've had sufficient training to deliver feedback. And to have these sensitive conversations sometimes with individuals. They also need to be well in the loop with what the organisation expects and what the organisation's goals are for the year ahead or 3 years ahead. They need to be aware that when they're discussing individual career opportunities, what opportunities are there actually available within the organisation, so they're not making any false promises. Employees need to understand how their role fits into the bigger picture of the company and how their performance contributes to business objectives. And this goes right down to the cleaner of an organisation, the receptionist, moving on to a sales team, perhaps a customer service environment, line management, operations. This is just as important for every role within the organisation. Employees need to be motivated and well equipped with skilled resources and support to achieve their objectives. There's no point putting objectives in place that aren't achievable, nor is there any point putting objectives in place where the organisation isn't going to support and facilitate that learning and development to achieving that goal. So again, regular two-way conversations with managers is central to building trust, connection and acceptance, making it possible for managers to have a much better relationship with the people that they're leading. When people feel valued for their contribution, they can see how they're making a difference and they'll want to do more, perform better, and they'll feel more engaged, more productive. So discussing performance once or twice a year is not enough. But if that is the option, if that is the option selected on the poll, then don't worry about that, because going through today's conversation and today's discussion, you'll realise that you can very quickly change that framework without much fuss and much investment, by just having regular conversations with your staff. And studies consistently show that employees need regular feedback, recognition and guidance from the managers in order to perform to the best of their abilities. So let's move on and we'll look at the key ingredients of performance management. I've already said objectives a number of times, but the first and the main key ingredient is to set SMART objectives. By SMART, we mean specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-bound objectives. I often set objectives looking at 3 months ahead. Again, the 3 months ahead will encourage ongoing conversation and discussion, but also it holds me as a manager accountable to my individuals, and it holds employees accountable. Again, we hear all the time with the annual objectives, you put an annual objective in place, and if you're only having those conversations 6 monthly or annually, you get to the 6 month conversation and it might be that the support and the training that was agreed and required that linked to that objective has still not been set up. So we've wasted 6 months. So if we cut that process down, cut down the time frame, encourage more frequent conversations and shorter term objectives, then we've got a better chance of succeeding and progressing. So we want to set objectives for individuals, for the departments and for the company, and make sure they're all linked. Objectives can be targets or tasks. They can be work-related objectives based on results to be achieved, such as a sales figure, or there can be personal and individual development objectives. So that could be to qualify in a certain area, or to develop negotiation skills, for instance. Over time, there has been a shift from output-only goals, and a greater emphasis has been placed on how an individual contributes to the organisation. So it might be not necessarily on the number of sales figures, but how those sales figures are achieved. And this would link into the company's values. So just to give you an example of how we link organisational objectives to department and then down to an individual. You might have an organisational objective to achieve a 95% client satisfaction rate, which is monitored and measured through various assessments throughout the year. You might then look to bring that down into the department. For example, the customer service department. It might then be an objective that they need to respond and resolve customer queries within 24 hours, which then links to customers feeling satisfied. So that's the department objective. Bringing that down to the switchboard, their role in achieving this overall organisational objective might be that they need to make sure that they take accurate query details, they ensure the issue is passed on to the relevant team player, the customer service care team perhaps, and within a set time frame, so within 30 minutes, to give the customer care team the best chance of resolving that issue within 24 hours. So that's just a loose example of how that might work, going from organisation to department to individual. Individuals seeing how they contribute to the overall organisational objective. So SMART objectives are the first key ingredient. Does anybody currently use SMART objectives as a tool within their performance management cycle? If you do, if you pop that on the chat function. Just having a quick read through. Absolutely, performance management, yeah, impacts well-being. SMART goals, brilliant. So Nikki, you use SMART goals, excellent. Excellent, Stephanie. Aligning KPIs and objectives on job descriptions, absolutely, and monitor via monthly reflection. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I could talk all day about performance management, but if you get more technical and deeper, that performance management should revolve around the job description, having the explicit behaviours and the job tasks detailed on there. That's what you then use to set your performance management and your objectives going forward, and that would really help. That's a great tool. So you may all wish to have a quick review of whether or not you've got JDs in place, and if you do you use them? Do you use them enough? Do they form part of the performance management review? If not, why not? So let's move on to the second key ingredient. Another word that you're going to hear me say quite a lot is feedback, and it's frequent feedback. So one of the biggest factors in improving performance is giving employees effective and frequent feedback. So we did a poll within our organisation. I read some CIPD studies, and it shows that 90% of millennials would feel much more confident in their role if they could receive much more frequent feedback and had more frequent performance conversations with their managers. We decided to run a poll internally of our team. We've got 30 employees here at Howarths, and our team actually showed that some of our employees want feedback on a weekly basis. So this just goes to show that the annual performance process is rather outdated right now, because employees need that constant feedback, recognition, reinforcement, and guidance from management. So there were a global study by Gallup which found that employees whose managers have regular performance discussions were 3 times more likely to be engaged. So this is huge. This is massively powerful. As it, highly engaged employees, we know they perform better, they're far more productive, and they can deliver significantly higher productivity for your organisation. So if we know that feedback could make our organisation more successful, then we need to invest time and plan and schedule feedback opportunities. So anybody that's doing monthly sessions, monthly check-ins, monthly supervisions, monthly one-to-ones, whatever you like to call them, fantastic. If you've got remote workers, then we need to be exaggerating that process, because they are at higher risk of becoming disengaged and feeling isolated. And, they may be less inclined to ask for support and ask for help. So just exaggerate that process a little bit, but you need to plan those sessions. I can see there that somebody's put SMART objectives are great, but find it difficult to set objectives for administration staff. I agree. SMART objectives won't work all the time. It depends on the nature of the role. But anybody who's struggling, I'd be happy to catch up afterwards and perhaps give you a few ideas of how it might work. Administration team, it might be around efficiency or quality standards, which we could build on perhaps. So how can we have more regular feedback? One-to-ones, check-ins. Employee recognition is very simple, but it's forgotten. When was the last time you said thank you or well done to one of your team? Do you do it often? Has it just become part of your management style? The global study, sorry, it was a global study by Gallup Group. So yeah, when was the last time that you thanked a member of staff? Thinking about it the other way around, when was the last time that you did something, or you delivered a project, or you felt you went over and above for your colleagues or your management team, and you felt like that wasn't appreciated or acknowledged? They didn't say thank you. How did that make you feel? Did you ultimately feel disengaged? Did you feel like, well, I wish I'd not bothered? Why did I put in the extra effort? So often businesses spend awful lots of time and money in building complicated performance-related reward processes, offering pay rises, bonus structures, perks, voucher schemes, monthly competitions. Yet the regular thank you can be far more powerful and engaging. So maybe just take that away today. It might be something you always do. It might be something you could be a little bit more aware of and a little bit more conscious of. And it's, you know, it's a free way of acknowledging employees and the work that they're doing. So let's move on to another key ingredient. At last, we move on to the performance appraisal. I hope you'll see now that appraisals are just one of many performance management tools that aim to ensure employees' performance contributes to the business objectives. So like I said, I think there were about 70–75% of you that were having performance discussions more frequently than annually, but for the other 25%, you'll be able to see that annually is just not cutting it right now. And those chats need to be ongoing. In isolation, a performance appraisal is often not very effective in improving performance and employee engagement. And I think somebody had already popped on the chat before. It can often actually be disengaging. It can do the opposite as a standalone tool. However, they shouldn't be eradicated entirely, as they are a key component in a holistic performance management framework. So a performance management appraisal is a process for employees and the line managers to discuss their performance and development, as well as the support that they need within their role. It's often used to both assess recent performance, as well as focusing on future objectives, opportunities, and resources that are needed. But let's just have a quick look at the traditional annual review. So the traditional review, gets a lot of criticism, which in my opinion is quite often justified. So the traditional annual review, they're not frequent enough, which can limit their value and effectiveness. Let's face it, circumstances change, roles change, goals change, business changes all the time. So we need to keep the ongoing process of conversation and redefining objectives as we go. The focus on past performance with little attention to future performance will stifle improvement and learning and development, and again gives a negative tone to the performance appraisal itself. There's also a tendency to give a good or a poor overall assessment based on that one particular aspect that stands out. Feedback often comes from a single source, which results in it being subjective and not necessarily holistic. So how many times does the manager that's delivering the annual review seek advice and opinion from various stakeholders, customers, clients, other management, employees, team members? I've heard that annual reviews can be dreaded by some employees and managers. Employees are worried about what's going to come from it. They're not sure what the feedback might be. Managers often feel that the annual review is time consuming, paperwork heavy, focus on retrospective issues, and can all round end up demotivating and used as an opportunity to discuss faults. The annual appraisal often doesn't align to the company objectives very well, and in turn, not very effective and lacking value. I don't know if anybody's heard of the 30-day review effect. So this is where the annual appraisal, we get to the annual appraisal, we think, right, we've got a review coming up, and what do we do? Do we have a big dossier of feedback that we want to give based on assessments throughout the year, or is it a last minute scramble? So we call it the 30-day review effect, which gives weight to more recent occurrences as opposed to the entire period of review. And in that 30 days, somebody may well have spent 9 months underperforming, and then the latter months they might have had a spike in engagement for whatever reason, and then we give them an outstanding performance review. Or the opposite may happen. They may have had 11 months of fantastic performance and then a month of disengagement, whether that's disengagement because of something at work or something in the personal life. Again, obviously, this is totally exaggerated circumstances, because hopefully those things would have been picked up, but equally it can happen, and it does happen. Again, with the traditional annual review, actions are not always followed up on. So the promise of training, the promise of development and support, might be the promise of coaching and things like that. They're not always followed up on. And management and employees are not held accountable until the next review. And then we feel like we've wasted a year in that individual's development, which again, for the individual, they can devalue the process, feel disengaged, and they may wonder and worry about where their career is going within your organisation. Like I say, much of the criticism is justified. However, the key element of an appraisal still remains important as ever. The key element being to present feedback to employees and how they're performing, which is most likely why companies are rebooting their process as opposed to ditching annual traditional appraisals entirely. So, for example, the likes of IBM, Microsoft, KPMG, they were in the news over the last few years with CIPD, saying that they've relaunched their performance process and they've ditched the traditional annual appraisal in favour of regular feedback, one-to-ones and catch-up and review sessions on a more informal basis. So let's look at when performance appraisals work best. I'll let you see the slide that's on there. So part of a continuous holistic cycle, individuals' progress towards goals is regularly monitored. Feedback is immediate. This one absolutely blows my mind. So feedback should be in the moment and immediate, good or bad. Whenever something happens or occurs or is brought to your attention, that's when feedback should be given. But again, we seem to store the feedback up for the set, booked, arranged meeting, whether that's monthly, quarterly, annually, and we save that feedback. But why don't we deliver there and then in the moment? It's crucial to engagement and motivation and learning, reinforcing positive outcomes and positive behaviours. Ongoing focus on improvement. Feedback focuses on building strengths rather than fixing weaknesses. Again, I've seen so many appraisal systems that assess people, we do the SWOT analysis and we look at people's weaknesses. If people have weaknesses, which we all do, if those weaknesses do not affect the job description and aren't part of that role, then why are we focusing on them? Or even if they are we better to focus on the strengths? Are we going to get more out of the individuals and more out of the employees? We don't need all employees to be well-rounded. We need to build well-rounded teams. So not well-rounded individuals. We want to focus on individual strengths and focus on building a well-rounded team. I often find, and CIPD studies suggest, that pay should be discussed at a separate meeting. Again, this makes the conversation much more honest, rather than feeling like you can't give a good performance management review because there's no budget to offer pay incentives and rewards. Involve employees in appraisal discussions. So I always promote having a structured performance management policy, and having two policies, in fact, a policy for the managers, showing them and detailing how they should implement the structure and how they should monitor performance and run one-to-one sessions and run annual appraisals, and also a policy for individuals, because this is a very much a 50-50 process. Individuals need to contribute to the process in terms of their aspirations, their learning, their goals. And we're not talking about everybody wanting to become the MD. You know, we may well have an administrator that doesn't ever want to progress from administrator, but let's face it, we're at work for a long time, so they may want to be, and should want to be, the best administrator that they can possibly be. And they may have some valuable ideas and input on how we can improve efficiency and improve customer service and improve sales and everything else that goes on within the organisation. So employees need to prepare and need to be part of that feedback process and performance management cycle. So let's look at the core elements of an appraisal system. Appraisal systems can vary between companies, but processes will generally have many similarities. So we can see there that the first key element is usually measurement. So this allows employees to have their performance assessed against agreed targets and objectives, as well as behaviours and attitudes. So we've talked about the objectives, whether they're SMART objectives or setting goals, but we need something to measure. Again, we're saying that word again, feedback. Feedback provided during the appraisal process should provide employees with an understanding of their performance, their progress towards achieving the goals, what's required of them, and how they can continue to perform well in future. The third is positive reinforcement, emphasising what the employee's done well and offering constructive criticism about what could be improved. So forgive me for this analogy, but I've got two small children, and a part of the learning process starts when we're babies. We have positive reinforcement all the way. If our children do something well, or if our puppies do something well, we treat them. We're encouraging that positive reinforcement. Adults need the same thing. Within the work environment, we need the same thing. If we complete a task in a certain way, then let's encourage that, show positive reinforcement, and they'll continue to deliver the process in the same way. If we don't, then they may go back, may default to another way, as they may not feel that they did it quite right, so they may change what they're doing, and then the process might not run as well. Again, if we don't jump on that and provide constructive criticism, they may continue to provide a service or a function that doesn't run as well as it could do. This will impact on not only their own goals and achievements, but that of the department. It could slow the department down, and again could then prevent the organisation from reaching the goals that they set at the outset. For the open exchange of views, so this basically means a frank conversation between parties about what has happened, how the employee can improve, the support they need to achieve this, and their aspirations for the future. Similar to positive reinforcement in some ways, but an open exchange of views involves the employee's thoughts to ensure that there's an agreement with the feedback that's been received, and an agreement that the goals are achievable and realistic, an agreement that they've got the tools and support necessary. Agreement is the final core element, both parties jointly coming to an understanding about what needs to be done to improve and sustain performance generally. and how they can overcome any issues and barriers if there are any. Once an agreement is reached, then this allows the appraisal process to restart again, and so allowing the performance review to be a continuous cycle of development and improvement. So how do we actually review performance? So we'll move on to the next slide, but in order to prepare, managers need to gather quite a lot of information, as I've already touched on, individuals, and again, and highly promote the 2 performance management policies. We need to gather feedback on the level of performance since the last review meeting. We need to look at the previous and the current objectives. Were they achieved? If not, why not? Are they still relevant? The employee's general competence, is the performance below, within, or above requirements? The company's values and behaviours, how does the employee work within the values and behaviours that are expected? Are there any factors that have helped or hindered performance? Any learning and development needs, potential support, potential career development opportunities, or potential objectives for the next review period? I often get my team to come up with some of their own objectives as well. Again, this makes them feel more valued and contributing to the process. It can seem that there's quite a lot to think about when you're going into a performance review, but failing to prepare will usually result in a poor meeting and then actions not followed upon. Once the performance assessments have been made, managers can talk to their employees about the performance progress, and they can focus on the behaviour, on how things have been achieved and what needs to be done going forward. I've already said feedback is a critical element to the performance management process, and not just because it aims to focus on learning and improvement, but because it allows individuals to monitor their progress towards the goal and stay motivated by understanding what's left for them to do to reach the next step and reach the next level. It keeps them going. It's important that feedback, again, I will repeat, is regular. So we'll move on again to the next slide. So once you know how to review performance, you can then hold effective appraisals. But in order to ensure an appraisal is effective, it must be conducted in the right way. So like I say, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and it will very much depend on the nature of the business and the people involved. But just I'll let you have a quick read of that slide, but there are some examples of the good and the not so good. So we're nearly there now. So just summarise then. We'll just have a quick look at the overall final cycle. A performance management cycle requires an holistic approach that is linked to the organisational strategy and very much should start with setting goals. So SMART objectives work well in many contexts, but we do have to think about how they would work for complex jobs and other jobs within the organisation. Again, like I say, if anybody wants any questions and questions around that, then we can answer those afterwards. But if we follow the cycle round, we would set the objectives, plan learning and development, offer feedback, schedule reviews, keep planning those learning and development needs, move on to more regular feedback. We still have a key role for the annual appraisal, discuss reward, and then back to the beginning of setting new goals for the period ahead. So that's it in a very whistle-top-stop nutshell, and we'll now move on to the Q&As.
Well, thank you very much for that, Tracey. That was very informative and a lot of feedback in the chat. That was fantastic to see that amount of feedback. So we do have a couple of questions in at the moment. So the first one is, do you have any tips on how to create a good personal development plan for individuals?
So yeah, a good personal development plan for individuals. So what I would say is start small. So I'd start with, sit down with the individual, let's review their job description, and let's look at what, if that individual was performing exceptionally well, what do we want them to achieve? How do we want them to deliver against the tasks? What behaviours do we want them to demonstrate? And then let's have a look at that against what they're currently doing, and perhaps start with just picking out 3 objectives. So bringing it down to, and just going off the query that was mentioned in the chat about administration, if you've got a receptionist and you look at their job description, their role is to manage the switchboard. How do we set a performance development plan? We want them to be much more efficient and more effective. So we might say you need to be answering the call within 3 rings, which gives a better service to the customers or the clients ringing in. You know, we don't have to have anything overly complicated. So what I'd say is review the job description, look at the gaps there, and start small. Baby steps, 3 objectives, 4, 5, nothing complicated. Keep reviewing regularly and move on to bigger, more in-depth objectives as you go.
Okay, so we've got a question. Could you please shed more light on incorporating the corporate objective into the operational / departmental units?
Absolutely. So the easiest example of this is if the organisation wishes to turn over £100,000, how does each individual department contribute to that organisational objective of £100,000? So you may have one department with £20,000 target and another with £80,000 target. Let's look at the one with 80,000. You may then, very simple maths here, you may then have 8 individuals within that department, and they're then given an objective of generating £10,000 income each. So that's a very simple example of how you would link the organisational objective down to the department and then down to the individual. Hope that helps.
Okay, and another question. Is there a difference between the performance management system and performance appraisal?
Absolutely. So the performance management system or the performance management process is the cycle of performance management. A performance management appraisal is one tool used within that cycle. So the cycle might start with an appraisal to set the goals, followed by, for example, monthly or quarterly one-to-ones, followed by, at 9 months perhaps, a self-review, an individual self-assessment, and then followed by an annual appraisal. So the annual appraisal is very much one tool that should be used as part of the performance management process.
Okay, so we have a question. How do you deal with a manager that wants to set 10 tasks for their member of staff when the rest of the staff have 3, which is more achievable?
So what I'd say there is the manager probably needs an element of training. All too often managers are promoted because they're good at the job at hand, and then they're promoted into management. They get given an appraisal structure, which is quite often a tick box exercise. And again, I hear the dreaded, I don't like to give a 5 out of 1 because 5 means they can't develop and improve. So I'll sit at 3 or a 4, and you know they want to give all these tasks that are unrealistic. Sounds like the manager needs some training or coaching around what good performance management should look like within an SME, and what SMART objectives look like, how to construct SMART objectives, and the importance of regular feedback. And then you may achieve 10 objectives within a year quite successfully.
Another question is, do you have any tips for SMEs to get the new performance management off the ground? We're currently doing an annual review, but not in a good, consistent manner. And now we want to switch to the regular appraisal and feedback.
So communication here is key. So what I'd start with is having conversations with your team around your acknowledgement that you're probably not giving feedback to your staff enough, and your desire to build and implement a more structured and frequent framework. And again, I talked about earlier developing 2 policies. The second policy for the employees is very much empowering and encouraging employees that this performance management cycle is nothing to be scared of. It's not negative. It's all about making sure and us understanding that quite possibly by having an annual meeting, we're missing out and we're not doing enough by our employees. We're letting them down. We're not developing their skills. We're not using the skills that they already have. They could add more to the business, and we're accepting that now. So I'd start with communication with your team. Be very open and honest about what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve that, ultimately to improve individual performance, engagement, enjoyment at work, motivation, and drive the performance of the business.
I would also add into that as well that if you are a toolkit user, if you're a current customer, then I'd encourage you to have a look at the new performance management module to see how that can help you. And of course, if you are not a toolkit user, get in contact with our sales team and we'd be happy to show you how that module and the rest of the system could benefit your company. So we have a couple of other questions that we'll answer. First one is, in our company, we've discussed peer-to-peer appraisals. These could run as part of a performance management cycle. Do these work?
Ooh, good question. Very much depends on the culture of your organisation. And there needs to be an awful lot of training around peer-to-peer appraisals as well, in terms of what information should be shared and how to give feedback. We don't want any attacks on personality and things like that. If it's structured well and there's training involved for all employees, possibly bringing in a consultant to set that up and make sure you've got the right environment and the right culture to take on this approach, then they can work very, very well. But they have to be approached, I would say, with caution as well. Definitely need training, definitely need a detailed and thorough process, and some form of specialist advice in rolling that out.
Okay, and then I think we've got time for just one last question. Helen asks, is there a good way to word an objective for managers about how they performance manage their teams to help hold them accountable?
Yeah, so if you could start with, I suppose you could start with one of the objectives being that they hold, you might set the objective is that the manager has to hold effective monthly one-to-ones with each member of staff with documented objectives and progression. And that would hold them accountable. So whoever it might be that's their manager above them would need to see sight that these conversations are happening, that the objectives are being put in place, and that you can see progression from individuals. So that might be a starting point.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tracey. We don't have time to answer any more of your questions. As Tracey said, if you do have specific questions you'd like to ask her, then get in contact. If you have enjoyed this webinar, then do look out for the next webinar that's coming up. It's about how to perfect your performance management cycle. And as you can see on the screen, that'll be the 16th of June with our guest speaker, Catherine Gilbert from Bayani Law. Camille has put a link in the chat for you to register for that webinar. And just so you're aware as well that we have recorded this webinar and we will be following up with an email with a link to that recording as well. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Tracey, for your time and expertise. And then thank you everybody for joining us as well. And we hope that you have a fantastic sunny day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.